Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everybody. And thank you so much for this very interesting opportunity. I'm Ilaria Iannuzzi, and I'm from the University of International Studies of Rome in Italy. The title of my paper is The City and the Game, the Role of the Smartness. Some word about my biography. I'm an adjunct professor of politics and good practices for the integration and of sociology of political communication and social media at the University of International Studies of Rome. And I'm also a postdoctoral research fellow in sociology at the Department of Political Sciences of Sapienza University of Rome. What about my presentation? The key points of my presentation are three, and my speech focuses on the dimension of the game within the smart city. But why specifically the game? Because, as we can see, the game today is being increasingly introduced to an extent in the urban sphere and becomes a new way of managing the city of the future. Today, I will try to provide an idea of the relationship between smart city and gamification to highlight the opportunity and risks dynamics of this link. So I will move proceeding along three fundamental points. The first one, what is meant by gamification, the literature on the smart city and its multiple meanings for reasons of time will be taken for granted. The second point, what is the relationship between smart city and gamification? And the third point, what are the opportunities and risks related to a specific meaning of games dimension? The first point, the literature on gamification is now heterogeneous and not fully codified. It consists for the most part of conference proceedings and research papers. As for the smart city, there is no precise definition, but in the sense that the scientific community currently shares, the term gamification is intended to refer to the use of the game in all those contexts not properly of game, not properly of play. But why should we analyze the game in the urban environment? We can see a rapid diffusion of gamification processes within the current social context. It has been stated that the game has no other meaning than itself. On closer inspection, however, the game, as well as being a goal, can become a mean to achieve goals, also very different from pure fun. The third point, the analysis of the opportunities and criticalities. This is the central point of my presentation. The urban games are nowadays experiencing an increasing expansion with recognized in the city their ideal environment for development. Using game processes means activating a series of elements and dynamics typical of the game. It involves, for instance, employing the logic of points, levels, rewards, badges, leaderboards, challenges, and missions. Through these elements, it is believed that a greater involvement of the actors can be reached than in the case we use other tools, for instance, communication or incentives. So, gamification mechanisms are characterized by two elements, an ever greater pervasiveness and an ever greater persuasiveness. These games contain, in fact, models of so-called digital affordance, that is, tools, objects able to incorporate qualities that suggest actions and behaviors to the user. In fact, we can see a persuasive digital affordance which bases its effectiveness on two main models that are used in games, the par-rhetoric model and the par-value model. They are mechanisms that move the social actor to assign a specific meaning to the reality, exploiting the dynamics and concepts of digital games. Mechanisms capable of orienting towards a specific sense rather than another. We can note, therefore, that the social consequences in terms of social control, privacy, security, but also of the critical capacity of the subjects and the definition of reality, just to name a few, that can come from the application of such models are extremely risky. We see that the ability of gamification to find application in urban contexts depends on the growing demand on the part of social actors to experiment, test, to try increasingly emotionally engaging experiences. In this sense, the illusion of an endless life, the possibility of accessing the new game as many times as you want, makes the game a reality in which it is increasingly exciting to take refuge. It is, in other words, entertainment that becomes the current connective tissue of global society. Smartification through this gamification practice seems to be an economic mechanism and oriented to efficiency as the final goal. The search for game spaces, in fact, can become, and this is what is happening, a real market. The smart city, in this sense, can represent a valid example of what is defined as corporate storytelling or a corporate narrative which considers spaces by virtue of their ability to originate economic opportunity. This is also what happens in the use of game in work. Let's think, for instance, of the electronic whip so renamed by the underground workers of the Disneyland Resort Hotel in California. The digital board shows the work of the laundry workers. It constantly measures their productivity and takes on different colors based on speed with which the laundry is washed, dried, and folded. Supervisors set goals, and if you are in line with them, your color appears green. Otherwise, it becomes yellow or red, depending on how far your productivity moves away from the set target. These are, of course, only a few examples, but they allow us to reflect on the extent of consequences that the distortion of the logic of the game can generate. I move rapidly to the conclusions. Although the gamification of urban contexts can lead to a greater involvement of the inhabitants in the public sphere, on the other hand, there are several risks that should be analyzed. One of the greatest risks is the reduction of the complexity that the game entails that, although at first glance it may seem desirable, from a critical point of view it can generate a classification of the social actors through the categories of the game. For instance, good and bad, based on appropriate and inappropriate behaviors. Good if you earn points, accumulate bonuses, overcome with agility the various levels and challenges that the game proposes. Bad if you don't earn the same results. It is a dichotomy that, far from remaining confined to the context of the game, risks giving rise to new forms of exclusion and social stigma, as well as representing a new insidious form of social control, capable of affecting privacy and freedom, but also one's status and rights. So, it can be important to analyze processes that employ leisure, fun and recreation, changing the constitutive meaning dimension of these areas, bringing them to an economical and efficient logic. The game represents one of the fundamental ways in which, as Mongardini states, we can do society. But the shapes that this constitution can take, however, as we have seen, can be also very different from each other and far from the game as understood in the common sense. Here are some references. The first page and the second page. And these are my email addresses. So thank you very much for your attention and for this opportunity.